tutorial, I want to go over directory services and cover a lot of the elements that we've already spoken about in the classroom. I'm going to start off with domain controllers and Active Directory and replication. This is something that people get confused about. They are just one element, if you like. Three components that make one element. And so if we start off with the server, let's call it PDC1. So we've got a physical server and we're going to call it PDC1, Primary Domain Controller 1. That's just a physical box. The next thing we need to do is install Windows Server 2008 on it. Once we've installed that operating system, we then need to activate Active Directory. So we install Active Directory onto the 2008 server, and as this is the first server in our domain, we make it the primary domain. So in our classroom example, we had a virtual machine. We called it Server 2008-1, and it was called the virtual domain. So those three elements make up a domain controller: a physical server, Windows Server 2008, and Active Directory installed on it. We've now got a domain controller. Active Directory is the software that sits on the domain controller. So now that we've got our domain controller, we can use Active Directory and we can do all kinds of things as discussed. We can create users, edit users, delete users, set permissions. We can set times when people can log on and when they can log off. We can disable accounts. We've got a whole myriad of things that we can do now that we've got Active Directory running. And Active Directory becomes the main database in which all our user accounts and user details and permissions are all held. It's all well and good having one domain controller, but what happens if that controller fails? So we've got a problem then, we've lost our database. So we normally have at least 2 domain controllers. So to have another domain controller, we follow the same steps again, and we would want to replicate. But the first thing we would need to do is get another domain controller. So we find another server, and we call it Backup Domain Controller 1. We install Windows Server 2008 on it, but this time we'll install Active Directory, but this time we'll join it to the PDC domain. So where we had a domain called virtual, if we were going to add another server into it, we would not create a new domain this time, we would just join it to the existing domain. Not every server needs to have Active Directory installed on it. So we need to be careful of that. We don't want too many domain controllers, but we want at least 2 or 3. So we've now installed another server, installed Active Directory on it, but joined it to the PDC domain. So we've now got our second server, and we'll call this one our backup domain controller. So now we can replicate. So what is replication? We've got our 2 domain controllers, and those databases are going to be updated. So either server can now log us on. They help each other out. So at the start of the morning, when thousands of students come in and log on at 9 o'clock, both of these PDCs and BDCs will help each other out. They will both take part in logging people on. So they'll take the load. We've also now got a backup of each Active Directory database because they're backing themselves up to each other. When we create a user, so as an administrator, if you create a user on BDC1, that account will be updated with an Active Directory. But PDC1 won't have a copy of those changes until it replicates. And replication will all depend on how busy a network you have. If you have lots and lots of regular changes, you'll want to replicate more often. So I'd have a new password reset on BDC1, but if PDC1 tried to log me on, it would still have my old password until they've both replicated. So they both replicate in both ways. So a change either way gets replicated, and obviously the more often you replicate, the more up to date the data will be. the PDC, the first one we ever make, will win out in any conflict. It becomes the master, if you like. So if two changes happen at the same time, PDC1 will always win out because that was the first one ever created. If PDC1 failed for whatever reason or had to be replaced, we would promote BDC1 to become the primary domain controller and then follow the steps to add in another domain controller. Okay, let's have a look at account management. With AD installed, we can now manage accounts, and we've done this on our virtual machines. So if you go back and start up your virtual machine, you can look at account management. We can create users, apply permissions and security levels, reset passwords, lock and enable accounts, delete accounts, apply groups and group policies, and apply login time slots. They're just a few of the things that we can do. If you add in an Exchange server, as we've discussed, you suddenly get a whole new load of features that you can manage someone's email account as well. So account management allows us to do all of these various things to the user's account. For example, if students don't return library books, we can lock their account out, or we can edit group policy to stop them having internet access until the book is returned. So that's account management. There's a video link that shows you account management in action from the Room C10 YouTube channel. Authentication. The first step of authentication is to enter your username and password. So every morning when you come in, you log on, you enter your username and password. This will authenticate your credentials against those stored in Active Directory. So I'll come in, I'll put in my username and password, and I will hit the enter key, and my password will be checked against Active Directory. If successful, I can log on to the network, but I will only have access to the services allowed within Active Directory for me. Typically, you will authenticate against an Active Directory or domain controller, file servers for my Z drive, for my public drive, email servers, so that will give me my Outlook or my Exchange mailbox. Proxy servers will let me onto the internet. Moodle will let me log in as teacher rights, and SQL server will allow me to mark the register. As a student, you can't connect to the SQL server, and you won't be able to connect to the staff email server, but you will authenticate against the email, against the student email server. So authentication doesn't end when you log on. Whenever you try to access specific services on the network, you'll be authenticated time and time again. But because you've logged on the first time, you're not asked to re-enter your password time and time again. Rights can be removed from these at any time, resulting in a failure to authenticate. So if we decide you're no longer going to have internet access, we'll take away your proxy server authentication, and then you won't be able to, when you try to surf the web, access will be denied, or the authentication will be turned down. Domain name service. We've discussed domain name service on the internet, where if we enter bbc.co.uk, and then that gets translated into an IP address. But within Active Directory, DNS is just the same, but it's very important, and it converts the names into numbers. Without DNS, we would have to remember the IP address of every computer. When we created user accounts on our virtual machines, we entered //2008 server 1 as the map into Z, rather than 192.168.0.1. So if DNS failed, our mapping would point to the server name, not the number. So there would be no way to convert the name to a number. So without DNS, we would have to put in, when we map a drive, we would have to put in the IP address rather than the name. And this will become very complicated. DNS also simplifies things. If we decide to change the IP address of a server, the IP address will change, but the name will remain the same. So DNS will update its record for the IP address, but not the name. So it's a lot easier. So if I've created a login script that maps to the Z drive of Bart, for example, if I change the IP number of Bart, DNS will update it so that we can still keep the name of Bart. Everything that has an IP address has a corresponding DNS entry. So all the PCs in the network, so the classroom PC could be called T for T-core -C10-01. That's the first machine in the room. Servers will have names. As we know, we've got Bart and Kent. Printers will be given a name, and typically the name of the room they're in and the model they are. And again, photocopiers, the library photocopier. So without DNS, we would have to use numbers throughout the network rather than names. Group policy. Group policy is an important feature of an Active Directory and one of the biggest security features that we have. Active Directory allows us to create groups and to add users to those groups. So Active Directory, I can add all students to the student group, and then group policy takes it a step further because we can apply a policy on that group, hence the name group policy. So we can remove the control panel, the C drive, the run command, etc. We can reduce what that user can do. IT students can have run and can see the C drive. Standard students cannot. They don't need to see the C drive, so we don't let them see it. You need to save your virtual machines to your C drive so you get access to it. Group policy also allows us to push out applications to groups, so we can push out software. So if a new piece of software came out, we could push that out. It's quite common to push printer updates out to groups. So you could apply a group for the printer for a particular classroom. So when you log on in that classroom, it will pull the printer details down, so you could print the printer in that room. And I've got a video there that'll show you how to configure group policy, and by configuring it you'll see group policy in action. File sharing and sharing resources. These are fundamental parts of any network. File sharing is when we create a shared folder that other network users can see, and depending on the rights they may be able to upload and amend the files. So we staff have a public drive, and we've got a folder in there that IT lecturers can copy files into, and we can update those files and collaborate with each other on those. Shared folders are often called public drives, so students have got the public P drive. We can also share resources. The things typically shared resources are printers and volumes on servers. A printer can be shared amongst the whole office. Typically the printer is connected to the network, so most printers now have a RJ45 connection into them, so we can plug an Ethernet cable into it, give it an IP address and a name, and that becomes a shared resource on the network. And then that named resource gets a print queue located on the server. So you can send jobs to the printer, and the queue gets stored on the server, so there's plenty of room to store the queues. Most printers have only got a small amount of RAM to store that. The library printers are a great example of shared resources, because no matter what room you're in, you can send print jobs to the library printer. Volume is another name for hard drive. So typically the C drive is called volume C, and we can share the drive on the server and allow students to store files. So your Z drive is actually a shared drive on one of the servers, and that's how we share our data and our volumes. Storage space, another fundamental of every network. We've discussed file sharing and resource sharing, and this basically amounts to storage space. So file sharing, resource sharing, when we share volumes, are basically storage space. We've got Z drives, P drives, and we've got the V drive. This is all storage space. This is all files stored on a shared disk somewhere, and the more we save, the more space is needed. Fortunately, drives are 1 to 2 terabytes in size now. As well as the extra space to save the files, we need extra storage to back up all this data. We can't just store our Z drive details, we need to get them backed up somewhere as well. So, as you can imagine, storage on a network is growing time and time again. Storage can come in the form of disks and servers. We can attach USB drives, and we've got NAS, network attached storage. These are just basically boxes You stick disks in them, sometimes called JBODs, just a box of disks, just a bunch of disks, or just a box of disks. They've got an Ethernet connection to them. You plug them in, and then they haven't really got an operating system as such. They've just got their own basic vendor-provided operating system. And you can share those and save work onto them. It's quite a popular way to back up large amounts of data. And also cloud storage is popular today. Gmail, for example, gives us a huge amount of data. We've got OneDrive as well, we've got Dropbox. This is all popular storage space for us. And I've noticed students like to store their data on the cloud so you can access it anywhere. And I hope you found that little presentation and a recap of directory services helpful. Thank you very much.